Thank you. Can you all hear me well? Great, great.
Loud and clear.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Glad to be here, folks. My name is Guru Sethupathi, founder and CEO of FairNow. And our mission is to really simplify AI compliance and risk management for our customers. And we're going to talk a bit about governance, risk management, compliance in the context of AI. One thing to just build off of what Earl and Srikanth were saying, another way to think about private AI is when you hire human talent, right? Let's draw an analogy here. When you hire human talent, sometimes you hire generalists, but oftentimes when you're hiring for a specific role, you hire for someone who has expertise in that industry, in that function, in that company, whatever that may be, right? And so that's another way to think about private AI versus kind of general AI, right? It's going to be embedded with some of that expertise, your own personal company data, your industry data, other types of knowledge and information that's going to make it perhaps better on certain dimensions, right? And so again, that's another way to think about private AI versus general AI. But look, we're going to talk about governance and compliance. And why are we talking about that? It's because it's the number one hindrance to the adoption of AI, right? The number one hindrance to the adoption of AI is companies are worried about the risks. And all sorts of risks, right? Risks around data privacy and data security that Srikanth and Earl just mentioned. Risks around bias of using these technologies. Risks around the laws and regulations that are now coming up, right? Numerous laws and regulations that are coming up and not knowing, are you compliant with these laws or not? What's going on? And so those hesitations, right? Is it reliable? Will it work? How does it work? All these, confusions and hesitations around risk are really the number one factor for slowing things down. I often say there are two risks to think about. The biggest risk you can take in this time is not to invest in AI. I'll say that again. The biggest risk you can take is to not invest in AI because all of your competitors will be investing in AI and this technology is going to transform businesses and markets. On the flip side, the second biggest risk you can take is not governing your AI. Because if you invest in AI and don't have solid risk management and governance practices around it, you are going to be liable and it is going to go off the rails. And so those two things go hand in hand. I often see companies too risk averse and too concerned and not investing and learning about how AI can transform their business. And then I see some companies jumping whole hog in without understanding the risks, without having a governance program in place, without understanding compliance and setting themselves up for a real liability. And so there's a really fine line to thread here that we're going to talk about how good governance can really square that circle. And it can mitigate your risks while at the same time allowing you to harness the power of AI. And so especially for banks, right? Just a little bit of background. I've come from the financial services sector. I spent the last 7 years at Capital One. I was a senior executive there, leading AI technologies and teams, as well as managing governance. And so feel very comfortable in saying, look, most financial institutions already use AI in some way, shape, or form, right? Let's pause for a second. AI is not just Gen AI, right? It's not just ChatGPT and Claude and Llama. That's generative AI. But machine learning models that use data to learn and draw inferences and make predictions, they've been around for a while. AI has been around for a while, especially in financial services. And so many of you are already likely using AI via machine learning models. Either you built them internally or you use them via, you get them from vendor partners, from fintechs, et cetera. And now many more are interested in investing in Gen AI. So that's fact number one. Fact number two, which I'll share in a second, regulatory scrutiny is increasing, especially in regulated industries like financial services, insurance, health, HR, et cetera. These, and for reasonable reasons, right? AI is starting to make decisions around people's careers, around people's finances, around people's health. So it makes sense that there should be scrutiny around it. And for a lot of organizations, either AI risk management and governance is new or it's quite painful. It's very manual. I've lived this. I've had to do governance, AI governance in the past. I've had to do model risk management in the past. It's a lot of time. It's very manual. It's tedious, and it can end up being a lot of time. And so look, that's why we are here via our platform to really automate and simplify AI governance for our customers. Let's jump to kind of some of the things we're seeing in the industry, right? So among regulated industries, especially in banking and insurance, there's now a lot of increasing regulatory pressure. The interesting thing is there's already laws on the books. So if you think about it, if you think about in the lending space, there's already laws around anti-discrimination, right? That doesn't matter whether you're using human judgment, a machine learning model, or generative AI, right? Those laws still stand. You cannot be biased in how you lend, so on and so forth. You have laws around data privacy. All those laws already exist. These new laws are just extending those laws even further. And so you have laws like the Colorado AI SB 205, that is a broad-based AI law. You have Colorado SB 21, which is focused in the insurance industry. You have laws in New York State and California that are starting to come out. Some have passed, some are about to pass, that again, talk about the importance of AI, governance, and responsible AI. The EU AI Act has passed. So for those of you who are, at big banks, multinational institutions, that is going to be a big deal. EU AI Act is a very, very comprehensive act around the use and governance of AI, especially in high-risk domains, of which banking and lending and financial services and insurance are all considered part of high-risk domain use of AI. EU AI Act goes into effect January 2026. Colorado goes into effect January 2026. Numerous other laws go into effect later in 2026. So really, this is the year, if you haven't already, to start thinking about how are you managing these risks? What governance practices do you have in place? What policies do you have in place? What controls? What roles and responsibilities? All of these things are important. And you can see the increasing scrutiny. These are just an example of some recent lawsuits that have happened in the last couple of years, right? And this is just ramping up even further. And so again, I want to go back to that initial point. I don't suggest this to scare you from using AI, right? If you don't use AI, you're taking on a different kind of risk, but use it responsibly. And there's a way to do that well. When you think about governance, for those of you, hopefully this resonates. If you already have governance set up, we often hear how painful it is. Very few people come into a bank or financial services and want to work on governance. It's not a sexy topic. It's not the thing. It's not the cool thing. And so you often get a lot of turnover in risk management and governance teams. For a lot of regional banks that I've been talking to, a lot of them have a very small risk management team. It's not large at all, right? And now there's additional work to be done, additional risk management, additional laws, additional compliance. And so people are, especially mid-sized banks and some large banks are concerned about how they're going to manage all this with the resources that they have. And so how can you simplify? How can you automate? And as people who have lived this, me and my team, again, a lot of us come from Capital One, having lived this, we understand the pain points of governance and what you can do to simplify it, to automate it, etc. Because what we want to do ultimately is help you manage that risk better so you can go take on the fruits of your AI investments. So here are some common themes. Hopefully this is helpful for all of you, right? That we have seen, we've talked to dozens and dozens of folks at mid-sized to large financial institutions. And these are some 4 common themes. Oftentimes they feel that their governance maturity is fairly low, meaning they haven't invested a lot of significant resources in governance or risk management. They've kind of let it skirt. If especially their models are coming from external parties and vendors, then they're even less sophisticated often in governance. And so that's point number 1. Where are you on your governance journey? This is an absolute must-have going forward. Where are you on that journey? Are you in the low governance maturity rate where most other financial institutions, especially mid-sized financial institutions, are? Second, for those who do have a good governance program, who have solid controls in place, what we're hearing is it's mostly manual. It's very, very tedious, mostly manual. It requires people spending a lot of time and effort creating documentation, doing reviews, analyzing reports, et cetera, right? So ask yourself that question. Where are you on that governance journey? If you are more sophisticated on governance, are you automating many aspects of that? Are you able to simplify that, or is it manual, tedious, and cumbersome today? Also, a third piece I'm hearing is outside the biggest banks, a lot of banks get their AI from external parties. They get it from external vendors, they get it from fintechs, and now they're starting to get it from foundational models like OpenAI. They're getting it from other parties who are building on top of that foundational models. They're not often building it internally themselves. And so there's some mix of like internal models, but also a lot of external models. And how are you managing the governance of those external models? Just to be clear, that is your risk. If something goes wrong and you're using an external model, you cannot offload the blame to the external party. And there's already been legal precedent around this. I know it's not in the same sector, but Air Canada was using off-the-shelf AI tools as a chatbot to interact with their customers. Srikanth is laughing. I think he knows this example. And what happened was it hallucinated, it made up stuff, and some customers were misled about the refund policy. And look, this is a very simple example, right? And in the end of the day, the dollar amounts weren't huge, but the precedent was important. And when they sued, Air Canada tried to argue, oh, no, we got this from a vendor. We got this AI from a vendor. That didn't fly, and they lost the case. You are responsible for the AI's tools, models, systems that you use in your organization. And so that means you need to have governance around the vendor tools, the vendor applications. So how do you do that? And then the last thing is around regional banks, mid-sized banks, large banks. They're all concerned about the increasing regulatory scrutiny and lawsuits. I think I showed you that on the previous page. Not only are there more laws coming out, but the number of lawsuits have also increased. And these are, they're expensive. They're time-consuming, expensive. Settlements are huge. This is a concern. And this is something, again, most regional banks have not had to deal with in the past, but there's increasing scrutiny. And I showed that again on the previous page, but let me hit on that, right? Like, not all of these are large banks that you see on this page, right? And so you're seeing more scrutiny, especially with sponsor banks and their fintech partners, examining that relationship where there has not been a lot of governance, AI governance in the past. The OCC is coming down and putting in cease and desist around this, right? So this is something for you to think about as you are already investing in AI and as you increase your investments in AI, right? So what are some of the things around what good governance looks like, right? What are the things you need to do? Well, one is, do you even have inventory of all of your AI assets and applications? What is an AI application even? How do you define it? Right? There are some applications that are simple predictive machine learning models. There are others that are much more complex that take in a variety of kind of machine learning models plus LLMs, all to do a kind of chatbot. So what kind of model systems do you have? What kind of data goes into these systems? What kind of output comes out? How are you using these systems? What are the risks? You got to get your arms around all of this. So that's number one. That's kind of governance 101. Understanding what you have, what are your assets, how are they being used, and what are the risks? The next step around governance is humans in the loop. For a long time to come, as long as we invest in AI, we're going to need humans to play an important role in governance. Who's ultimately responsible for that AI solution? Who's reviewing the risks? Who's approving it at the end of the day? Who's creating the necessary transparency documentation? Multiple stakeholders will need to be involved, from the IT group to legal risk and compliance to the AI team, right? And so you need a way to get folks on the same page, to assign roles and responsibilities, and to be able to manage the governance and the risk. And that's especially true when you're talking about vendor governance. Right? One of the pains that a lot of customers facing is, how do I manage vendor governance? A vendor will just send over a bunch of documents. Are you going to sit there and read through dozens of documents from each vendor and say you have 20 vendors? What about OpenAI? What if all of a sudden OpenAI does something and they start using certain types of data that actually could get you in trouble? How would you know that? Are you monitoring all of their updates constantly? Imagine a place that is doing that automatically for you, right? That's automatically managing what vendors are up to and is able to tell you and flag you what risks you might have, right? Then it comes to documentation and reporting. Documentation and reporting is a huge, important piece around AI governance, both from a transparency standpoint, but from an audit trail standpoint, et cetera. Regulators love to see documentation, expect to see documentation. In fact, if you look at the EU AI Act, if you look at Colorado, we've already broken it down. There is a series of documents that they expect from you. Are you going to be spending all your time creating these documents? I remember on my team at Capital One, data science will spend 20% of their time, their overall time, just creating documentation for risk management for AI. That's a lot of time with expensive resources, right? How are you doing that? How nice would it be if those documents were automatically created, right? If there's automatic reporting and dashboards and documentation, how much time would that save you? And then the last piece is around regulatory compliance. What laws are in scope, right? One of the common standards in financial services is SR 11.7. And that's another question I'd encourage you guys to think about. How long or how many of you are following good standard practices around SR 11.7? Do you even know what that is? Do you know how to implement those controls in your organizations, right? And then on top of that, there's many other laws, right? That I mentioned earlier that are coming out. What if there are going to be 20, 30, 40 laws, patchwork, a whole system patchwork of laws across states, across regions, across localities? How are you going to keep track of all that? In fact, someone asked me the other day, with this new administration, doesn't this all go away? And my answer is no, it's the exact opposite. Because what we're not going to get is any kind of federal law around this. We're not going to get any federal guidance, any federal law around AI. And so what's that going to do? Think about it for a second. What that's going to do is there's going to be now states are going to have to lean in on their own. And each state's going to do it just slightly differently. And so you're going to get a much more patchwork system of laws. And that's going to be a bigger pain to deal with. In 2019, there was one law related to AI. Today, globally now, there's more than 3 dozen. And I'm telling you, we're in the top of the first inning, right? We're in the top of the first inning. There's going to be many, many more. How are you going to manage all of these laws and understand what's in scope? What do you need to do? So on and so forth. Your legal risk and compliance teams will be overwhelmed. These are the components that we help with at FairNow. We help automate a lot of this. We help simplify this. And so instead of having to go build out a huge risk management and governance team to track all these things and manage all this work, imagine a platform that can do a lot of that for you. The one piece that we don't do that you should also keep in mind as part of good governance is testing and monitoring, right? Making sure your models are working properly. This is something Earl and Srikanth mentioned earlier, right? Making sure they're not hallucinating, make sure they're not biased, making sure they're not sharing data, important data, company data, private data, confidential data, right? There's a whole set of data and monitoring that's also important. And there are tools out there. And what's nice is we can integrate with those tools as well, right? And make sure all of that is satisfying compliance and regulatory expectations. I'm going to wrap up quickly here. I think what I'd like to do in this last couple of 2 minutes and then open it up to questions is just share the power of how we're leveraging AI ourselves, right? The platform has intelligence and automation built into it, and that's how we're building it. But what's cool is we're building into it knowledge of AI compliance and governance so that it becomes really, really good at this one thing. This platform isn't going to be able to solve all of your needs, but the things that it can do is it can absolutely solve your AI compliance and governance needs. It's going to be really, really, really good at that thing. It's going to provide you insights on that. It's going to guide you through the process. It's going to make the right recommendations, and it's going to automate a bunch of the activities. And so that's really where we're starting to see our customers benefiting, is they can leverage this platform to build that risk management in place, and then boom, they can go invest in AI and know that their risks are mitigated. That's a powerful combination. The companies that are investing in AI and managing their risks are going to win the next 5 years. So with that, I'd just like to conclude again. Our team, we're a bunch of, we understand this financial services industry well, come from Capital One, so we've been there. Capital One is probably one of the world's leaders when it comes to AI risk management and governance, right? They have amazing best practices around this stuff. And so I encourage you all to think about, how are you managing these risks? How are you simplifying this so that you don't have to build out a big team to go do this? And how are you ensuring that you're managing these risks so that you can at the same time take advantage of AI, which Earl and Srikant said is going to be the biggest disruptor over the next few years. So on that, let me pause. And I think, Bennett, we have time for some questions.
So one question just popped up in the queue here, Guru. Why do we see low adherence to these AI laws among organizations? Is it a lack of awareness about the regulations, or how does it work, or the law amount of fines, or something else? So why is this low adherence to these laws? What's your opinion about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Vipul has a question. I think Katrina has a question as well, just to make sure you don't lose previous questions as well, Bennett. So it's interesting, right? So I don't think that's quite accurate. I think, low adherence to certain laws. So I think the law Vipul may be referencing is the New York City Local Law 144. And the challenge there is that law was quite poorly written. It was one of the first laws that came out, I want to say about 2 years ago. But the first draft of it came out actually, I think 4 years ago, back in 2021. And it went through multiple revisions before it was passed in 2023. And ultimately, I'll tell you, and we've written about this, it's not a well-written law, Bennett. It's not a well-written law. And there's many problems with that law. And so that partially has led to lower adherence. The second thing is that the fines are quite low. And so think about it, right? What's your incentive to comply with a poorly written law which has low fines? Well, there's not a huge incentive. That being said, we have seen more and more adherence with that law over time. So I think that's important. I think the thing to take away from the New York City local law is that while it wasn't a great law itself, it set the conversation. And since then, we've had many more laws, right? And again, like I said, a lot of these laws go into effect in 2026. So Vipul, if a year from now or a year and a half from now, you see companies not adhering or complying with the Colorado Act, with Illinois, with California, with EU AI Act, with the UK is about to come out with one. If 18 months from now, companies are not complying with any of those, come back and have that conversation with me, because I will be shocked. They're much more comprehensive, and the fines are much, much, much bigger. Mm-hmm. In fact, the Euro AI Act, the fines can be upwards, especially for high risk systems, which many are in the financial services space, anywhere from 3 to 6% of your revenues. So you're not going to want to not comply with that.
Mm-hmm. Guru, this other question came from the audience that I just pulled into the queue here as well. Didn't pop in through LinkedIn, but the question came around: what frameworks or principles do you believe organizations should prioritize when operationalizing AI governance?
Yeah, that's great. Look, we have our framework, and I'll give you the highlights of that. But and that framework comes from our own experience and expertise, combined with what we're seeing out there in these new regulations. At the same time, there's some new standards that are coming out that I think are going to be a pretty big deal, right? Mm-hmm. You have the NIST. If you haven't heard, look it up. It's called NIST AI RMF. You can get more information off our website. Bennett will send you a link. Another standard is ISO 42001. ISO 42001 is actually a certificate standard. So if you follow those controls, you can actually get a certification from ISO and from an ISO auditor, and you can demonstrate that you have really good responsible AI practices. NIST is more of a recommendation. It's not a certificate standard. It's more of a recommendation. But again, we're starting to see many companies, especially in the US, using that as the default to start implementing a governance program. Okay. At a very high level, just to answer your question, what are good elements of a governance program? I think I mentioned them earlier. First, inventory your models, collect the metadata, and understand the risks. Second, you have to have an accountability framework. What roles and responsibilities do the humans in your organization play in terms of reviewing, approving, remediating, transparency, all these things? 3, you have to test and monitor these models, right? You got to test them constantly, test for bias, test for hallucinations, test for performance, test for data privacy. You got to run these tests and monitoring. And 4, you got to have compliance with laws and regulations, right? So that's a good kind of starting framework to think about. But then go check out, I think Bennett put something in here. Go check out these guidelines around, again, ISO 42001 is a great one. NIST AI RMF, they overlap 90%. And in fact, they also overlap quite a bit with SR 11.7. If you're not familiar, SR 11.7 has been around for quite some time and is a similar type AI model risk management guidance in the financial services space. In fact, many of these new standards and laws borrow from that. I often tell people financial services industry in some ways is ahead of the curve, right? And so SR 11.7, NIST, ISO, these are good standards to take a look at.
Excellent. And we had one question come in from, I think this is probably for Earl and Shrikant. So let's just kind of talk. I think you probably mentioned it towards the end of the presentation, but certainly you can, it'd be great to kind of circle back and, regarding the AI assessment, how long does it take and what are the costs? Earl, Shrikant?
Sure. So the assessment itself, I mean, the first step of the assessment is a phone call that takes less than an hour. And we can normally give you useful feedback inside of a week or so, depending upon what we get from that first call. So it's not a big time investment, but it is definitely an investment that people should take. To Guru's point, the regulations and rules around all the things we're dealing with are going to escalate. And this is not the adoption of AI, although it seems optional now, it's not really optional. That's an illusion. Nobody on this broadcast now can go to a Best Buy and buy a black and white TV. That's because the industry forced change. That's exactly what's happening right now with AI. So everybody's on some road towards AI, being with AI, being behind and competing against companies with AI, or just left behind altogether. So we, both of us, both Proxar and FairNow, really believe that you should really spend the time now in your planning and to do that smartly. It's more like sharpening the axe before you cut down the tree type of a metaphor. As you can tell, I'm a metaphor guy. But that's the big takeaway we hope you get from today's broadcast.
Great. Well,
and there's no cost. There's no cost to the assessment. Sorry.
Here we go. No cost. No cost. Again, thank you all so much. This conversation is not ending today. This presentation will be available on demand through LinkedIn. So please, we will be monitoring questions that come in from additional commentary as folks listen in later on in their day and their journey and such. So again, appreciate Proxar, Earl, Shrikant, thank you so much for your insights and your contributions, as well as to Guru at FairNow. Let's not forget to connect with them on LinkedIn. It's very easy. Obviously, you can type their names in or take a photo of the QR code and it'll be taking you right there. But anyways, appreciate everybody's time that you spent with us today. And we will be back soon with additional webinar content around all these topics, AI, private AIs and AI governance. Again, thank you all so much and have a great rest of your Thursday.
Yeah. Thanks, Bennett. Thanks, everyone.